Wait, should I act like a zinester? Like this?
Yeah.
What do you want?
He saw it through all the backstage passes for the both of you. Well, again, what does it mean to you? You think you're writing wrongs if you're all typewriter, but you haven't got a clue. 6 weeks in, and I wish that I was out. I'm missing my amenities. In a foreign land, doing all I can. Calling home is a luxury. We can be the band you love to hate. I think it's great. We demand nothing less. I'll revel in the pain. We're the lesser of two evils. I wish there's no divorce. Back to lava, coach to soundcheck, home by the port. Flying to Geneva, staring at disgusting airline food that is paid for by a third source. I can think about it, I can analyze it, I can find my dollar value. You know I wouldn't do it if I didn't want to do it, but I've made my own mistakes too. We can't be the band you love to hate. I think it's great.
A zine is a self-published magazine. It's usually photocopied, usually of an idiosyncratic nature.
And I used to think of fanzines as being just about bands, and people who were way into music would write these little publications that would talk about their favorite band. But I've come to realize that there were all sorts of fanzines just about things that people were fans of, you know, whether it was sci-fi culture or bands or model railroading or whatever. Pictures or images of some sort is a major part, but I don't think it needs to have that to still be considered a zine.
I think a lot of it is the intention behind it, and to me zines aren't about making money. I think the intention to foster some kind of community, to educate, to have fun, you know, those all are part of what a zine is.
What was the motivation? How personal was it? You know, how close was the final product to the person or people making it?
You know, if they have ad space to cover their costs, that even gets a little iffy in my mind. But the idea to me is that you find a way to produce it no matter what it takes, whether you're breaking into somebody's office and Xeroxing it, or you're scamming copies at a copy shop, or you're actually paying out of pocket.
I used to think you had to, there had to be some theft involved somewhere in the process, whether it's just the staples or, you know, the copies themselves.
Like, a lot of zine people are dorky people with eccentric taste.
There's this guy that's a shoe collector, and he started a magazine. It's all about collecting shoes, which I think is absurd. It has all the standard characteristics of a zine. It's like it's got that one single topic. The guy's complete freak about it and totally obsessed with it, and it's just something he's somehow funding mysteriously.
And if they don't publish some kind of document about what their eclectic taste is, they might not ever meet the people that have the similar eclectic tastes.
I mean, zines are awesome on boats. My skipper actually, he's like, I could do a zine. You just write about what you did today and what you ate and put a recipe in there, and then you write about your bike, and then you write about stealing something. He's definitely got that whole, it's not really writing, so he won't write for it. And he's he wrote something and it was published in Pacific Fisherman, and he got a shirt and $100. And that was writing, and I'm like, so Fred, if I give you a shirt and $100, will you write for me? And he's just like, you won't do it.
I think of Martin Luther as nailing his work to the church wall. But that was before the printing press, right? Because if he had a printing press, he would just be scattering it around, and that would be a zine. So that he was one of the pre-zines.
Some people consider Thomas Paine the first zinester because he was an independent publisher.
Pulp is sort of a derogatory term for a cheap magazine. 5-10 cents with really bad writing, but it's all action, adventure, thriller. You know, let's throw some sex in there. Let's put a catchy cover on it. And they called it pulps because it was using the cheapest possible paper that can run through a press without ripping. And a lot of printers had all this bad, really crappy paper that, you know, it was the Depression, they weren't going to waste it, so they needed to use it for something. They would write to the editors of these pulps and would say, hey, well, you know, if you went inside the sun, you would burn up because the sun is 46,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and no known material can withstand that heat. So that's definitely an error in the story. The editors started getting sick of it, and one editor had the idea of just starting publishing people's full addresses. What that meant was that all these sci-fi fans started writing each other, not just the actual magazines, and then from that people started making what today would be called a zine, but back then, a fanzine. And so I think you could probably trace it all the way back down to the sci-fi fanzines of the 30s as being sort of the genesis of the zine movement.
The labor movement, the union movement, there was a lot of literature made and copied and handed out during that time.
The next time in history that I become aware of the zine format is in the 50s with the Beat Poets.
There's a guy that I really have to give a lot of credit to, is Paul Krassler. And he started publishing The Realist on his parents' kitchen table in the late 1950s. He had been called the father of the underground press, and he demanded a blood test.
And then in the 70s getting picked up again by punk rock and used as fanzines for specific bands in England and then in the United States.
I guess it was the photocopy machine that really allowed that revolution, because that really, for the first time, it made reproduction affordable.
But what most people consider the first punk fanzine happened in 1976 when John Holmstrom came out of the School of Visual Arts. He just started a magazine called Punk, and it was this strange coming together of comic fandom, science fiction fandom, and music fandom. I brought a copy of one of the early issues that Joey Ramone on the cover, and here it's 85 cents. That's how much it costs to buy this magazine on the newsstand.
Zines and self-publishing have gotten national media attention.
In fact, once Penthouse did a feature on zines.
It started getting a big boost when alternative culture became the big thing, Lollapalooza, grunge. And the major magazines started to have features about zines, and so that sort of brought more attention into the zine world.
When a corporation is using a zine format to market their products, to make money off of it, I wouldn't consider it a zine anymore. The intention is not there.
I think it became more of a girls' place with the Riot Girl and all the zines that came out during that time.
I mean, it was pretty amazing to see the spike in those Riot Girl years, 92 to 95. It was like suddenly hundreds and hundreds of women publishing zines, and I felt like I wrote to them all, like we all wrote to each other. And then 4 years later, 2/3 of them or 3/4 of them weren't publishing anymore.
Zines got really, really personal over the course of time. They went from being zines about things to zines about feelings.
And now I would say that zines mostly are personal zines, and it's rare, it's more unusual to find a zine that's focused on a band or focused on politics or whatever, that the personal format is the most accepted format of a zine now.
This is probably the most important for me part of the zine, is just trying to explain why we do it, why we make the zine, and why I spend all that time to put on the Xerox machine.
It's kind of just something that I can't describe. It's kind of a need. Like, I just draw stuff, and then I fill up one of these books, and then I kind of edit down the least emo of the stuff in there and put it in a zine. Like, it's just something I have to do.
Everyone I knew played in bands, and I didn't play any bands and didn't want to, but I made art and doodled and figured out how to silk screen. The more I liked zines, the more I was like, oh, I should do a zine, I should do a zine.
And it's like a weird codependent relationship where I can't break up with it, even though I want to, and I'm like, I hate you. Oh, come here.
I know there's some people who like to make zines because they get mail and they have correspondence and they have pen pals, and I know there's some people that write zines because they have a feeling that they have something to say and they don't have another outlet to present that. I know that there are people who make zines because they really wish they were making books and they just don't have the ability to do that.
Usually it's a passion that's, a crackpot kind of passion. It's either writing a zine or yelling in the street corner.
Getting your ideas out is more important than whether they're the best idea ever or it's the worst idea ever.
And zines are versatile enough that there's kind of a place for anybody that wants to do their own artwork. And I mean that as like writing or editing or drawing or whatever it happens to be. There's enough stuff that you can find that in a zine. It's a versatile medium.
And we need sources of people who are going to take the news and distill it down into common language and summarize a series of stories that have been going on in the media and talk about it in plain speak.
Mainstream media has just done such a hack job of portraying what's really going on, but I think zines really, at times, fills that void.
I was under the impression that I was going to save Normal, Illinois, and I was going to provide all this this crucial information about women's law and like all these really important things on abortion.
The main advantage is control.
Control. Ultimate, unmitigated control.
I didn't know there was this kind of community that existed in the world where people could just not only just write things down and make art and have it Xeroxed, but actually have people out there that wanted to read it.
Oftentimes I think that it's just a self-indulgent thing, and other times I think that it's because I really have something to say that I think other people would enjoy.
In college, one of the things that they teach you is that there's a certain protocol to becoming the thing that you are being taught to be. So if you want to be a writer, then you have to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop, or you have to become an unpaid intern at Harper's. With zines, it's like you write the shit down, you figure out a way to copy it, you staple the shit, and you're a writer.
I just feel like, why bother waiting for someone else to discover my writing? I'm just going to do it myself.
Which is different than like turning on the TV or like looking in a magazine. You know, it's all glossy, and it's like you look at that and you can't think, oh, I could do that. Like you look at zines and you realize that that's something you can create.
There's small press, but it's not accessible necessarily to all people. So I think in the beginning, people began making zines in order to document a time frame that they were living through.
Without doing zines, I think I would have a lot harder time remembering really specific things that seem really important to remember.
Even if it's just a person's experience, say at like a protest or something, you know, that's not going to end up in the Oregonian or some major newspaper.
Zines are my healing. They're kind of like my therapy.
I think zines can have a way of analyzing issues like that and doing it on a much more kind of down-to-earth level where a lot of people are going to respond to.
With rape and sexual assault and things like that, it's good that it's getting out there on a personal level. If you read a newspaper, you'll read a story, but it's so sterile that you may feel some sympathy for what's happened, but you don't really understand how deep it actually goes.
Like a lot of the issues I went for were issues of mental health, and those are not issues that I think are very commonly addressed in the zine scene.
I think they're perfect because they're small enough that you can tailor your message to a particular group and easily distribute it to a particular group.
A young girl said, "Oh, are you Chrissy?" And I said, "Yeah," because she saw my zine sitting there, and she said, "Oh, I got your zine, and my mom was going to have gastric bypass surgery, and I got your zine and I gave it to her and she didn't have it."
Wow.
And I said, "Oh my God, that's great." And she's like, "I feel like it saved her life."
Zines have taught me a lot about, you know, personal politics, learning about people's politics, everything from, you know, how to fix your bike, stuff like that.
Zines were a way for me to learn about alternative culture and other ways of thinking. It taught me about issues I didn't know anything about.
Yeah, I mainly use zines for educational purposes.
I appreciate the kind of inside look that a zine can provide on a lifestyle or a career that I would never choose, like picking up dead bodies to deliver to the morgue.
A lot of the zines that I like reading that aren't by my friends are ones that are about, zines about someone who's really different from me, like a stripper or a transgender person.
A zine is sort of like going through somebody's sock drawer.
Only you get to tell them that you've done it.
Yeah, and then you can write them a letter about how you feel about their socks when you're done.
I sure do love on subbing.
Which is a zine about substitute teaching. It He writes a diary style zine talking about all the schools and students he runs into.
Currently, I'm not subbing, but I'm glad that he is, and I get to hear about it, you know?
Here's a zine that's not published anymore. It's a zine dedicated to the use of bodily fluids for revenge, and the contents are boogers, cum, turds, piss, puke, poetry, shit, piss, cum, shit, and piss.
This is a brain scan, and Alex was one of the people that I saw this stuff at Reading Frenzy, and I just liked how it looked so much that I bought them. And I didn't read them. I just flipped through them, looked at them, and I just liked how it looked, and I put it away. I've never read either of these two, don't tell her that.
This is my all-time favorite cover in a lot of ways because it's Mud Flap, which I love, and the naked woman hugging her bike with hearts coming out of her head, which I just thought was great. Her stories were great. She was totally wild, living this great life, hopping trains and drinking beer in the alley, and I just thought she was awesome. Plus she was a woman, so it was totally inspirational to me.
Nosedive by Icky is probably my favorite zine that's still being put out. It's just filled with incredible art and stories by a lot of different people, really concerned with what's going on in the world. And then each one had a saint on the inside. Dwayne and Icky had a whole saint project, and were focusing on different people that were heroic to them.
Well, my zine is about Chunk 666. It's a mutant bicycle creation. It's a bicycle club. There's some suburban kid in Illinois now who's cut off. Well, who knows there's something beyond the mall but doesn't know what really, and just has that yearning for something. It's hard to figure out why people are doing it, why people are making and riding these kinds of bikes or anything even similar without really spending time with them, I've found. And so I don't want to speak for them, I want to speak of them.
There's something called infiltration, about like sneaking into places. It's fun for me because I like the idea of sneaking into places, but I don't like to do it myself because I'm afraid, and it's nice to live vicariously through somebody that's going to all these cool places and read about it in a voice that is enough like maybe my own that I feel like I can relate to it. Oh, just the idea of being sneaky is awesome.
Well, Crap Pound is about copyright-free images for you to use in your layout and graphic design. If you wanted to actually make a font and paste things together instead of use the computer, extremely old-fashioned.
The whole thought of who should make a zine or who could make a zine is pretty irrelevant, because if you should or could, then you will.
I just go for it, and I'm just gonna start writing, and that usually takes me just a couple weeks of like completely alienating myself from everybody and like sitting in my room typing and like making art and stuff for it. And
You know, it's okay to start off copying something to some extent.
After we're finished, we go through it once or twice. Actually, we go through it and we print it, go through it again, and once again, and then we're finally finished.
You just don't put your home address on your zine. Get a P.O. box or have it sent somewhere.
Layout and content are both really important to me. Layout isn't everything and content isn't everything.
Even though there's crappy cut and paste layout, I think it kind of forces people to actually deal with the materials.
Well, like for me, cut and paste is pretty much how I do it. Is I'll print out the text on the computer and then I'll cut it onto to photos or drawings or various images as the backgrounds. And I usually try and get the photos or the drawings to somehow relate to the piece.
Typing is just so easy. It's just so like you can just type anything and erase it and change it. It just seems so fleeting. Whereas handwriting it is almost to me like etching it in stone, you know?
I'm not a mathematical person, so figuring out pagination was tricky, but once I realized everything had to be a multiple of 4, that made things a lot easier.
Some press guy was like, Just take the 2 pages, add them up. It should be one more than your total number of pages. If it's not, you've done something wrong.
Like I go to a convention like the APE or the Zine convention here in Portland, and these people are master craftsmen. Like they're putting together these hand-stitched books with grommets, and they take leather and somehow do something weird with it, and I'm like, oh my god, like I'm completely outclassed. Like these people really know what they're doing.
The zine format that I hate the most is like 8.5 by 11 printed out pages with the one staple in the corner. It's just like, it shows no attention to making a zine. It just shows attention to, it's like a web zine or a live journal, just something that you did really fast and didn't care about giving something nice to someone else. Everyone has a computer, has access to desktop publishing, has made zines get really crappy. Because people can just like type them out so fast and throw in some crappy graphics.
The thank you page, you get the little info page, there's kind of like a real specific art form to that, it's a genre in itself that, sometimes people, they get really into, and there's a like huge, thank you list and bands I've listened to and 8 addresses you can reach me at, and then sometimes they're just real 3 words, or they're at the beginning or at the end.
I guess if there's a pet peeve that I have about zines, it's that we usually sell ourselves short of what we're worth.
People who worry too much about money probably aren't making zines in the first place. So.
And I put only a $2 price tag on it. It should have been like $5. I could be making some serious bank if I charge $5 for this thing.
Sometimes I would think, should I make this cost more? And then I'd say, well, I wouldn't pay for that.
However much it costs to photocopy it, rounded to the nearest 50 cents or $1.
My zines used to be $1. It's kind of like the standard rate, whether you spent money or you made money or lost money. It was just always $1.
I don't know, it seems like right now there's been a zine inflation, and $2 seems to be an average price for zines as opposed to $1.
$2 zine, there you go. It's the new $1.
I'm actually thinking about charging more for my zines because it's a lot of work and it's very time consuming, and I would like to be compensated.
What can you get for $2? And just because the materials only cost 50 cents, does that mean that somebody's painting where, they're using a sheet and some old house paint, does that mean that it's only worth nothing because they didn't pay anything for the materials? I mean, that's ridiculous to say that something is only worth how much it costs to make it. It's crazy.
It lets the distro make a little more money, and I make a little more money, or the store makes more money, and then everyone else is doing it.
I mean, if you go to Old Navy, you think that you're going to get a $20 sweater, and that's what you're expecting. If they try to sell you one for $40, you're going to be like, no, you are not, like Bloomingdale's or whatever, which Bloomingdale's would be way higher. Like, zines, I mean, like, zines, you expect to pay like $1 or $2, You're not going to be like, hey, this is $10. Nobody's going to do that.
Regardless of what it's worth, I'd rather somebody just pay like an amount that I think is reasonable.
I've worked in retail long enough that I know what people will pay for things.
The latest issue of my zine costs $8.
I think that in our our alternative culture, there's such a de-emphasis on making a profit, and I think there's nothing wrong with making a profit. I think there's a problem if you fuck people over to make a profit.
One time I loaned my scam zine, and they kept calling me on the radio being like, this thing's great! Wow, who is this guy? Over? And I'd just be like, yeah, it's really awesome. And then they came and saw me and they're like, we lost it. Oh. And I was like, you lost my scam zine? And that's the other thing, like zines don't cost very much money, but you cannot replace them. People like do weird things where they're like, oh, it's only $1. But then they're like, oh, I can't ever get it. So it's only $1, but it's really kind of priceless.
And people say, well, aren't zines just another consumer item? And I don't really see that. I think, most zines are traded.
And I'll just take their little thing and be like, here you go. Give them a pile of zines. And they're just like, because like, I mean, they're going to remember that shit. And then when they make a zine, maybe they'll do that too, because it's more about like exchange.
I'm not making a ton of money.
I think the biggest problem for me right now is trying to find cheap copies.
I think you have to get inventive. I think with zines, sure, like production costs with reproducing stuff, photocopying, offset can be prohibitive.
My dad's a doctor, and he has a shitty copy machine, and so I think I was still living at their house, and I just made copies there. So I was lucky, and it was really easy for me to make copies of my zine.
Then when I was in college, I lost my access to free copies, which was me having the alarm code to my dad's office and breaking in and Xeroxing his. It was a small business that he owned. There was, 6 employees in a warehouse. The copy machine was in the warehouse, and I knew the code to get into the warehouse. And the only time I almost got caught was when I forgot the code to the alarm, and I set off the alarm, and the security and police had to come. And I just told my dad I was in the neighborhood and needed to use the bathroom, and he bought the story.
Usually you had 2 or 3 friends that ended up working in these places, and so it made it imminently affordable because it's free.
Going to office supply stores, I won't name them, I suppose, and they have copiers that's on the honor system. And I make about 10 copies there, which is enough for 50 copies of my zine somehow.
I just heard about the new Kinko scam or whatever, and I went there and tried it out. It was really busy, and it was in Detroit, and there's no Kinkos in Detroit, and I had to bike out to the suburbs, and then I was using it, and it was working fine, and then the worker came up behind me and was like, "Can we just get on this machine for a second?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, no problem." And then I was trying to get out of the new scam, and I couldn't figure out how to make the machine turn back to being normal, and I was freaking out, and the guy was like waiting there and kind of looking over my shoulder, and I was like, fuck it, and I just grabbed my shit and walked out really quick, and then left the original. And then, I was like, oh, they're gonna find, I can't go back.
I can definitely sympathize with someone who would not want to collate anymore, or not want to staple 1,000 things anymore, and maybe finding other ways to do that.
You just get done with folding and stapling after a while. I mean, people don't understand. It hurts to staple 500 things. Fold, staple, shake it out,
I get my zines offset printed, and so that kind of determines the fact that we have to pay a big, huge chunk of money up front to be able to get the zines, rather than going to Kinko's and making more copies.
This area here, this is a letterpress area. We've got 2 major different styles of letterpress.
I just put out examples of different ways that we get text and image on paper for letterpress. Handset type, and that's individual characters. And then this is monotype, which is a individual type still, but it's cast in order in a machine. And offset printing is a lithographic process, so you're going to feel anything raised. It's not a relief process. This plate goes around a cylinder, and both ink and water get fed over the cylinder, and the ink sticks to everything that on this plate is black. She's a ghost rider, Hollywood outsider, ghost rider and a typewriter, ghost rider, everything inside her.
Well, I guess originally I used to just make a whole lot of copies and just hand them out for free at shows.
For a few times I actually tried doing readings and then selling my zines based on that. I don't know how well that worked all the time.
It seems like distributors are probably handling it more, which is kind of weird. It makes it less hands-on and less personal to know the people who are reading your zines. Just the idea that someone can get a lot of different kinds of zines from one place.
It took a lot of energy to distribute a zine, send 10 here, 10 here, 10 here to all these independent distros around the country, around the world.
It's kind of like one-stop shopping, I guess. It's like the Walmart or something. So you don't have to go to each zine store and buy it.
I don't make money on my distro. I mean, for the most part, I never have to pay out of my own pocket, which is good. My distro in particular, it's called Girl Style, and I named it that and created it because even though there are so many amazing women in the zine scene, I still feel that zines made by men are often a lot more popular. They kind of get a one-up, and I don't really see why.
And I was trying you know, distribute stuff that I personally enjoy.
That's really hard. Like finding distros, I've sent my zines to a lot of different places and have not heard back. You know, you send your zine and you send a self-addressed stamped envelope and you send money and you know, and then like maybe 6 months later you get a reply, or if you get a reply.
I've seen probably like 100 distros start up and stop within months because people just don't realize how much work it takes.
When I started Youth in Revolt, it was like I wanted to become more of a part of the community, and I really wanted to get together zines I liked and make them more accessible, especially ones that a lot of people hadn't heard of.
No one's doing it to get rich, that's for sure.
It wasn't until I moved to Portland that I really saw the zine community. I lived in Boston and there were endless amounts of zines there, so you would see them for sale places. But Portland really had the out in the open, like celebrating the zine community.
You're just staying up until 6 in the morning at Kinko's with 6 of your best friends and plugging in a little boombox and just dancing and drinking coffee and you know, just like the crazy things that you do when you're young and totally in love with life and your friends. Just like the sheer youthness of it all.
Let's stop this talk of privilege, cause the songs that we sing are as much a product of our privilege as
Getting mail in my mailbox is just like one of the highlights of my day.
If I read a zine that I liked, I would like write a letter to that person and send my zine too. I like your work, please like mine.
I don't get mail anymore. Like I got sort of slick about it and it started looking really pro, and then people stopped writing me.
Only like 1 in 20 letters where they really go in and they sort of break things down and tell you why they like things and what they like and what they don't like. And those are the best letters for me.
One of my favorite things that I've ever gotten in response to anything I did, and it was someone had like wrote some rant of how I was stupid or I didn't know what I was talking about. He sent it on a floppy with like it was already formatted in Word, and I was like, this is great, I can just drop it right into the next issue. I felt like it was some kind of breakthrough in hate mail communication or something. It was really great.
I think that the art of letter writing is a dying medium, you know, and I still love it a lot, and so I try and order a lot of zines out of like Maximum Rock and Roll and other fanzines.
Maximum one year was giving away all this money, and they had written to a whole bunch of zine editors, and they wrote to me, and I had written the responses, you know, whatever. And I stopped in my P.O. box and I opened my door, and there's a thing from Maximum, and I had gotten $150, and I was like, oh my God! You know, and I was totally ecstatic. This institution that I have so much respect for just gave me money.
And they would write me letters to the editor, either detailing some gook or whatever that they knew, or responding to one of the articles in detail. People were really involved. I was kind of depressed and suicidal, and then I picked up your zine, and I really feel great now.
All of my friends that I still have, that I've had for a long time, have all done zines in their past.
I think most of the people that I met through zines after the fact, I felt like I'd known them a long time, even though I just met them.
Must have at some point met them in person because it feels like I knew them so well.
I can say something in a letter to someone, like how I'm doing, and write about some stuff I'm going through. And then if I see them in real life, I can't really talk maybe as well.
It's definitely opened up this community of people, but it hasn't really been face to face. It's supposed to be through people or through email.
I think if I were to meet a lot of these people in person, I would have a totally different view of them.
People are different than how they represent themselves, which is kind of fun, I think, or funny.
If it's not college-educated kids, it's people who could be college-educated.
Zines have always had a kind of a reputation as being kind of a young middle-class endeavor, young white middle-class endeavor.
Either middle or surviving working class. It's like an age group between, 16, 17 years old, somewhere in that range. And 35, I don't know how much older zine makers get.
I did my first zine when I was 29.
We feel like outcasts among the zine scene, or any scene mostly.
I've read a bunch of zines by people who are just like, oh, I don't fit in with zinesters, or I'm not cool enough to have a zine, or something like that. Fuck that.
Well, it's hard when you're big because you don't know if people are treating you differently based on your size, or based on your age, or just it's all in your head, or you know, they're just not friendly or whatever. I mean, there's a million different things.
Well, the problem with other zines is, you know, like everything in the world, 90% of it is crap.
While I do think, you know, there's plenty of self-published crap out there, there's as much, if not more, crap being churned out by major presses, which is the debate that I get into with people that have just decided that they don't like zines, which is kind of like saying, I don't like vegetables.
You know, that's how you find the really good stuff that no one's found before, is you have to read through all the crap. It's just the way it is.
I think that zines are one of the only places where people are allowed to give a well thought out but completely biased and completely personal rant about a sensitive issue, and other people read them and respect their opinions. And so
Or
in
attack
that
their
way,
opinions, depending.
well, respect their opinions enough to criticize them even.
You can write some very terrible things about people, and you know, you're kind of free of responsibility for them. So that legacy of zines has been a little disappointing.
One of the ways that zines has changed is that with the advent of the internet, people have removed themselves from the responsibility of what they write. So that in emailing and being on the interweb, people write way more in the immediacy of the moment and don't review their thoughts and don't collect them and don't think things through and just mail off stuff that is inflammatory, incorrect, and in the end, like, more divisive than bringing together.
I want to challenge the zine community to stop gossiping and start listening.
There's flakes in every aspect of your life, and zines are just one of those, and there's going to be some that are and there's going to be some that aren't, and a lot of people's zines are just an extracurricular activity. It's a hobby.
I've dealt with people being flaky when someone's like selling my zine for me, but for the most part it's like such an amazing thing that someone is willing to sell your zine for you and give you money for it, that that just blows my mind.
But then the zine and the punk community are both, they're subcultures, and sometimes in subcultures we like to pretend that we're separate from the world. We're like, well, you know what? Fuck sexism. We don't have sexism, you know, in our community, but we do. We absolutely do. There's always a sexist issue. There's always, you know, it might be better and it might be different, but it's still there.
You can be anything you want in your zine. Bill Price is a perfectly dangerous example of that. He was a two-time convicted child molester. He was in prison. He wrote a zine as if he was a young woman.
You know, zinesters still rape. Zinesters still are abusive. Zinesters are still people. They're still human beings, and they fuck up.
Like, what do you do when you read something in a zine that's offensive and the person who wrote it is your friend?
We need to call it out and identify it, and we need to scrutinize everything that we do.
I can kind of tell when a zine is written where someone's just like, I'm just doing a zine to get noticed so I can like advance my writing career or whatever. And it bothers me.
I think there are ethical boundaries, but I think that they shift. There needs to be an understanding that to survive in this society, unfortunately, we live under capitalism, and you have to compromise a lot of times, and people make different compromises, and I really hope that people would be open to the different compromises people have to make.
I think there's a lot of things about zines that kind of make you make those boundaries of selling out. It's just, you can't. Because there's not any money to be made in zines.
But now, you know, now he like designs Miller ads or something. So he's a sellout.
The ideal for me would be to write a zine and sell it and make a living. It's economically impossible.
The audience really will decide if they want to keep reading this person's work in that magazine or in this zine.
I don't go to Tower, or I don't go to chains.
If you want to support Borders or Tower or any of these things, that's fine. Because you're not you're reaching a wider audience, which might be like number one important to you, but you're also giving money to, you know, people who are putting other people out of business.
Man, let's talk about it. What the shit? Let's figure it out, you know? So it's like, A, let's be approachable, and then B, let's talk about it, see what happens, you know?
You get accorded a certain status from being known, you know, and you have to start to be careful about like the things that you say and how you treat people, because it isn't just like some dumb jerk from Portland. You're like Mo of Extra Tough Zine.
When you start doing a zine that becomes popular, people put a lot of weight on who you are and what you do. Like Aaron Comic Bus, I mean, good God, you know, he walks into a room and Aaron Comic Bus, or Cindy even from Doris, like, you know, they're pretty high up there in the pecking order in terms of zine world.
You have to foster relationships and kindness, almost in a self-preservation mode. I mean, it's like, yes, we all want to be kind and foster growth, but at the same time, sometimes you just want to like not talk to anybody, and if somebody wants to come talk to you and you're just like, fuck off, I'm grouchy, then they're like, Mo's a dick.
Hipsterism in punk, and especially zine culture, is fascinating to me, because collectively, like, 99% of us are all nerds, and at one time or another we've all been the kids in the schoolyard with milk coming out of our nose, you know? So it's like, where is this room for hipsterism? Like, I don't see it, you know?
For all the people who are anti-authoritarian in the zine culture world, people are very, very into creating like heroes.
I think because people are looking for who they are. People who write zines are really young for the most part, and they're still growing and learning and changing, and they haven't developed who they are. So they see these people who are kind of developed, and, you know, Aaron and Cindy are older. They know who they are, and they know what they believe in, and they know how they deal with things. So their stances are very firm, and their ideas are, you know, their writing is very great. So I think that people look to them because they are so established, and they know who they are, whereas these people are kind of, you know, growing, and they're, you know, 18, 19, sometimes they're 14. So there's a monumental difference from Aaron, who's 35 or even older maybe, and somebody who's 14, you know, so you have this mix of, which is totally natural, because I'm sure Aaron was like that when he was 14.
Reviewing a zine is like reviewing maybe what someone's wearing that day, or you know, reviewing what someone's eating for dinner.
Letting other people know who have read it before that there's a new issue out. It's like a cheap and free way of advertising at all it costs, just the postage you send.
If you send a zine in for review, you're asking for the criticism. You know, you know that you're going to take the chance. I mean, I've had some shitty zine reviews. Maximum Rock and Roll is called my zine, Rudimentary Riot, go crap. But you know what? People still ordered it.
Maximum Rock and Roll said, this is kind of a typical zine. Rub-on letters and typewriters and maps. There's one page of the maps, no other maps in the whole zine. Okay, yeah, there's a few rub-on letters, but you know what? I went through the whole zine to make sure there's no typewriter. You know, if you're gonna review my zine, give me some accurate information about it.
This one guy wrote me back and was like, this is one of the best zines I've ever read, and he did a zine. I really liked his zine, so I was like, wow, that's awesome. So I did number 7, and I sent it to him. And I was like, hey, here's my new zine. And he wrote back, and he's just like, your zine was way too personal. I mean, I was really young at the time, and I wasn't able to really separate criticism, like constructive criticism, from people's personal opinions. They were just like one lump, like insult. Like if somebody didn't like it, it was just some attack on me.
All you ever wanted to know about salmon fishing and more. Mo's a good writer. St. Brad the Road is my favorite story here. Insightful without being pretentious, and boy does she like life on the sea. She even teaches you how to splice rope. That's pretty much the review that I get.
Oh, I sent my zine to Broken Pencil. I want to see what they say. This zine recounts the tribulations of Steve as he wanders around Portland's punk scene, going on tour, losing pen pals as they move to his city. The writing lacks rhythm. It reads like a text without any punctuation, where you have to suck in a big breath and hope you'll make it to the end of the paragraph. On top of that, Steve is quite pathetic and doesn't raise much sympathy.
Being a disenchanted young hipster is tough. Small unemployment checks, housemates who don't do their dishes, buying a Megadeth CD case that holds a Cranberries disc inside. These are the trials of Jack, the primary character in Saturn's We Ain't Got No Car number 7, brief flashes interrupting his nearly autistic inability to interact with the real world outside his bedroom. New to Portland, he attempts to make an entire life and philosophy out of shopping decisions. Co-op good, Fred Meyer bad. Saturn may not be there yet, but he clearly has more promise than his anemic character, who seems barely capable of tying his own hempen shoelaces. Saturn would do well to leave lowercase Jack behind. And that's the ultimate diss, that last sentence.
Maybe some of it isn't the most constructive criticism. It just pushed me on, like, I just want to be a better writer.
And a lot of people wanted to say, oh, but she was being kind of encouraging here. She's saying you're a good writer, you just haven't gotten there yet. And I'm like, well, why, who is this one person to say whether I've gotten there yet?
A friend of mine years ago described it as a bucket of crabs, where you could fill a bucket up to the lip and none of the crabs would ever escape, because the crabs, as one crab started to escape, the other crabs around it would grab onto it and pull it back in. And so, it would just perpetually stay at this, and sometimes I feel like the zine community is a little bit like that.
Almost every zine started off with, I know the zine is coming out really late, and I've had the best intentions, but I've been really busy over and I'm reading zines nowadays that are still saying that, and it cracks me up. It's like, okay, let's just assume zines are going to come out late as a base, and then people don't have to start off their little editorial with that.
Zines are meant to be read, but they're also very much a visual medium. And we should try our hardest to make them look good as well as be interesting and to, say what we want to say.
I'd like to see more zines for kids.
I want to see more academic zines.
More second issues, I don't know. When I stopped doing kooks, I at that point felt expired. I felt like I had done and said everything I wanted to about kooks.
Matt Gunderloy had a real specific reason for stopping doing Fact Sheet 5. He sat down and calculated how much he was making hourly.
There were some that I think by the time I read them, they didn't even publish anymore. And that was one of those things you learn about zines.
That's the nature of zines. People stop doing them after a while. It's okay.
For some people, it's a hobby for a certain amount of time, and for some people, it's a life choice, and they're never going to escape it.
I think that it's naive to think that zines can change the world. I think it can alter people's perceptions, for sure, but I don't think that it can change a whole society.
My mom thinks that zines are the future. My mom is really into zines. She thinks that zines and community radio are the only things that are going to save our generation.
Zines are so insular. Is this really changing anyone's mind about anything at all?
I like to say zines changed my life, or zines saved my life.
I think that in some ways there's trends in political zines now, but I think there's like gluts of certain things. It's difficult for me to know, like, what am I going to even read about that? It's like kind of the same information over and over again, and my personal hopes is that it'll there'll be some like leading edge of that, of someone who'll really go somewhere else with it.
I would love to have new voices and people who are afraid to take risks on how they think and what they feel.
I think they've become way more of something to be reckoned with.
Oh, I made a zine and it was so revolutionary. Well, great. Let's take that energy and use it to try to make a more healthy society. Not in the way that's zines and punk rock or what is going to change the world for everyone, but let's use our ideals that we have learned through these projects and work with people.
We should be like that Dr. Seuss book where we all are able to stack on top of each other and get someplace new and exciting and good.
There will always be people cranking out zines on stolen Xerox time.
I would love to see zines keep getting published.
To the drifters! Don't set our paths cross again! To the homesick! 'Cause home's when we do meet again! To the drifters! Don't set our paths cross again! To the homesick! one.